All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Scratch track. So, this is going to be our third lesson in Scratch. Now, if we want to recap, in our first lesson, we talked about how to set up an environment and basic introduction to Scratch and what it is. In our second lesson, we focused on how to do basic movements with your characters and what code you can write to do that. And in our third lesson, this video, what we're going to do is we're going to deal with advanced motion. So last class we got our Scratch sprite to move from one place to another, but now let's say we want the sprite to move to a new place or backwards or in a different direction. So let's see how to do this. And the first thing I'm going to do is just change the costume to the normal one that we've been using. I was playing around with this earlier, so it changed a little bit. So this is the Scratch sprite you should all have, unless you chose a different one. If you're more familiar with Scratch, you would know how to do that, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So this is what we have from last class. When we press the play button, we have our sprite say good morning and glide across the screen. So this is a very basic movement, but if you want to create a game later on, which is essentially going to be the end goal of this course, we're going to have to focus on doing more advanced movements. So we remember our starting position was over here. And you can see the coordinates are negative 188 and negative 108. And we always have our sprite start here, say good morning, and then glide to a new position. So now let's focus on doing a new movement where we have the sprite glide backwards. So what we want to do is to have our sprite start at the starting position, say good morning, go to a new position, and go back to its starting position. So how do we do this? Well, it's going to be the same way we got the sprite to move to a new position in the first place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this glide object or function, and we're going to add it right under our other glide block. So now we have two glides. So first thing I'm going to do is just change this 1 second to 2 seconds. If you remember in our last video, it was a lot easier and it made a lot more sense if the glide lasted 2 seconds. Just for the distance, it looks the best. And we're going to change our coordinates. So we're not going to change the y value because the y value and our starting y value are the same. And we want it to go back to its original position. So the coordinates we're going to have it glide to after it glides to a new position is going to be the original coordinates. So that's going to be negative 188 and negative 108. I accidentally ran it, but okay. So we change this. Now we have it gliding forward and to a new position. So let's see how this works. So we have it say good morning, it glides, and it glides back. So it did do what we asked it to. It glided to a new position and it glided back. But it doesn't turn around after it reaches the new position to face the direction it glides in. Now this is a minor error. We can fix this easily and it doesn't really matter. But if you are creating a game and you want the game to have a good visual appeal, this is going to be really important. So how do we get the sprite to go to a new position, turn around, and go back? Well, there's this thing called costumes in Scratch. And costumes, you can have several different costumes for your sprite. The default it gives you is a cat, the Scratch mascot. And it comes with two costumes. The first one is the one that we've been using, where the cat is walking. Second one is where the cat is running. Now, we're not going to use this just yet. Today, we're going to focus on the costume where the cat is walking. But if you can see, the cat is walking and facing the right direction. And now we want the cat to face the left direction. We can do this where we click this to flip it horizontally, and now it faces the way we want. But the problem with this is when we run it, it's always going to face the left direction. We want it to face right and then switch to left. So we're going to flip this back. And the way for us to get a new costume where we have to flip it left is to go to this icon over here, choose a costume, click on it, and it's going to come up with a bunch of new costumes that you can choose from. And there's so many different ways or things you could add depending on the theme of your project. But since we're just doing a demo, I'm going to click on animals, get the same cat that we've always been using, cat A. Now, this is also facing right, and you may be wondering why it's doing that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to flip this one. The problem with flipping the first one is that it's always going to face right. And now we have one of each. So we have one that faces right and one that faces left. So we can go back to our code. And if we go to looks, because we want to change the appearance of the sprite, we can say switch costume to cat A and add it at the end. So what this does, it's going to start by default with costume 1. If we go back over here, we can see costume 1 is the sprite facing the right direction. And then after, it's going to switch the costume to cat A, which is this, and we can rename this to flipped cat if it makes it easier to understand. And this is the cat facing the left side. And so when it turns, it's going to face the left side. So this should work, right? Let's try it out. So the cat stayed facing left the whole time. Now this is because our cat essentially, it flips the whole time and it doesn't flip back. We want it to start facing right the whole time. And the way to do this is to add another switch costume block right at the beginning. And we're going to switch to costume 1, which is the default facing right. So every time our program starts, it's going to automatically face the right side, move in the right direction, and then move left. So let's see if this works now. It faces the right side, it does it, but it didn't switch costumes until the end. If you remember what we talked about in our previous class, in Scratch, the blocks only occur one by one. After one block completely finishes, then the next will start. Now, our position of the block, the switch costume to flipped cat block, is in the wrong spot. So all we have to do is move it. Now, where can we move this block? It's actually pretty simple. If you think about it, we want the cat to move in the right direction and then turn around and then move in the left direction. So what we have to do is place this block before it starts to move in the left direction or before it starts to move back to its starting point. So if this is the block where the cat has to move back to its starting point, we're going to move this right above it. And now our program should function as we intended. So it says good morning, it glides to our new position, it turns around, and it glides back. Now that we've done this, we're going to add a little bit more to our project. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the costume switch back to facing the right direction. Now I know this is a lot of switching, but it'll make sense. So let's see what this does. It starts facing the right side, it goes right, it turns around, goes left, and it turns around for its next movement. So we focused on how to get this to glide forward and backward, but actually you guys can make this glide anywhere you want, simply by changing this point, the points in this block. So if we change this value to a random x and a random y, and we run it, it's going to say good morning, it's going to go to a random position, turn around, go back, and turn around again. So I'm going to just change this back to what it was, but you guys can really play around with it and do whatever positions you want it to essentially go to. And so now that we've had this, we figured out how to get it to move wherever you want, and what else is there to learn? Well, you need to know how to make your sprite jump. So how do we get the sprite to jump? Well, it's going to be essentially the same thing as we've been doing. You're going to have the sprite glide up and glide back down. So we're going to go to the motion section and we're going to focus on using the glide values. Now we're going to add 2 glide blocks to the end, and I'll explain why we're using 2 as opposed to 1. Basically, when you jump, you go up and down, and glide blocks, using glide blocks, that would be 1 gliding up and 1 block gliding down. So each of these blocks is going to signify half of the jump. This block will signify the character going up and moving up, and this block will signify the character moving down. So the jump we're going to try to recreate is a jump forward, 1 single jump forward. And how we're going to do this is we're going to change these values to what we want it to be. So we're going to change the x. If we want it to move forward, we have to have a higher x value. Now, if you're familiar with negative and positive numbers, you know that negative 190 would be lower than negative 188 because it's farther on the negative side. You want to go closer to the positive side. So a way to do this is choosing a number closer to 0 in this case. So we can choose negative 100 for our x as it moves forward to a coordinate that's closer to 0. And for y, we can choose negative 20 because this value is higher as well. And then for this position, we want it to return back to the ground, so its original y value. So the y value is going to go back to what it was, but the x value is still going to increase. This is because when you jump, you don't move forward and then move back. You keep moving forward. Your x value keeps increasing, but your y goes from up to down. So we're going to change this to an even higher number that's closer to 0, and we can change this to negative 20. And actually, we're going to change the y to negative 50, not negative 20. And then it's going to go back to this. So if we take a look, we can try to see what we've created so far. So it starts facing right, turns around, and now it's going to jump. So it did jump, it did what we wanted, but it looks a little slow. So a way to speed this up, like I mentioned last class, is by changing this time. If you change this time, it's going to do the same motion, just in a shorter time interval. So we're going to change this to 0.5 seconds in both slots. That means the jump will total be 1 second, and going up 0.5 seconds and going down 0.5. So if we take a look at this, we can see how everything functions, goes forward, goes backwards, and jumps. So we have the character jumping, and if you wanted to include this in your game, it's going to be a really important part. In some of our future videos, we're going to focus on how we can get the jump to look better and even happen multiple times or multiple ways. So we're going to go over one more time what each puzzle piece does so that you guys can have a better idea of how everything comes together, because we did add a good amount to our project. So when we start, we are switching our costume to costume 1. This means that the character is going to face the right side. Costume 1 is essentially the right facing cat. We're going to go to this position, the starting position in our case, just on the ground. Remember, we faced the difficulty of making sure the cat starts in the same place every time, so we added this block. It says good morning for 2 seconds, and then it glides to a new position horizontally straight, and then it turns around when it switches costume to flipped cat, and it glides to its starting position and turns back around, getting ready for the jump. Then this glide causes it to jump up to a position somewhere here, and the second glide causes it to come down. Now let's take a look at this one last time before we head out, and you can see the Scratch character moves front, back, and jumps. So I hope you guys had a good understanding of everything we've covered. If you have any questions, you can always contact me, let me know what you're struggling with, and if you have any suggestions, let me know as well. I really hope you guys were able to take a lot away from today's lesson, and I'll see you guys next week to talk about new events.